I'm Regina Slater. I'm 29 years old, I manage freight logistics for a living, and until last Thanksgiving, I genuinely believed that if I just kept being useful enough, my family would eventually decide I was worth keeping. I was wrong. It was a 4-hour drive from my apartment in Columbus to my parents' house in Allentown. I made it anyway. I had wine I couldn't really afford, a pie I stress-baked at 6 in the morning, and the same dumb hope I packed every year, that maybe, this time, dinner would just be dinner. Toby met me at the door before anyone else did. He's my parents' bull terrier. Wide head, one black patch over his left eye, built like a fire hydrant with opinions. He hit my knees the second I stepped inside, shoved his whole face into my stomach, and just stayed there, heavy and warm and completely sure of himself. I grabbed his ears. He groaned. For about 4 seconds, I felt okay. Then Mom appeared from the kitchen doorway, looked me over once, and said, before hello, before anything, "You know what your problem is, Regina? You always think you're more than you are." I stood there, holding a pie and a bottle of wine, and I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes your body doesn't know what else to do with a sentence like that. The house smelled of turkey and candle wax, and that specific kind of tension families wrap around themselves like it's normal. The good plates were out. The cloth napkins were folded into triangles. Mom only lights the centerpiece candle when she wants the night to look more put together than it actually is. It was lit. My younger sister Fern was at the table already, on her phone. My brother-in-law Tyrone stood near the back window with a beer, doing that thing where you look calm but you're really just committed to not getting involved. Edwin came in from the garage and hugged me sideways and said I looked tired, which from him means he actually noticed something but won't do anything about it. Toby followed me to every room. That's the thing about him. He picks someone and he stays. Every time I sat down, he was already at my feet. I kept reaching down without thinking, scratching behind his ear, and every time I did, I felt slightly less like I was sinking. The first hour was all surface. Fern asked about work, Tyrone talked about traffic, Mom moved through the kitchen like she was performing efficiency for an invisible audience. Edwin nodded at the right moments and said very little, which is basically his full-time job at family events. Then we sat down to eat, and Mom set her fork down, looked straight at me across those perfectly folded napkins, and set it in front of them all. I think it's time someone said something honest. Regina, you have been a burden to this family, and I think after tonight it would be better for everyone if you figured something else out. The table went quiet. Not the surprised kind of quiet, the kind where everyone already knew it was coming and decided ahead of time they weren't going to be the one to stop it. Fern looked at her plate. Tyrone found something interesting on his fork. Edwin rubbed the side of his jaw and said absolutely nothing. And Toby, still under my chair, pressed the full weight of himself against my left foot. I don't know why that was the thing that kept me steady, but it was. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I looked at my mother and I thought, okay, you want to do this here, in front of everyone. At the table I helped pay for, in the house I've been quietly keeping above water for the past year. Okay, Mom, you have no idea what's coming. I didn't storm out. That's what she expected. That's what she was ready for. Instead, I picked up my fork, cut a piece of turkey and chewed it slowly. Let the silence sit there. Let everyone marinate in it. Mom watched me from across the table with this look she gets, patient, satisfied, like she'd just made a move in a game and was waiting for me to panic. I didn't panic, but inside something had shifted, something quiet and permanent, like a door closing at the end of a long hallway. Toby crawled out from under my chair about 10 minutes later and went and sat directly in front of Mom, just stared at her. She told him to go lie down. He didn't. He just kept staring with that flat, wide bull terrier face that gives nothing away. Fern laughed a little, then caught herself. I don't know what Toby was doing, but the timing was something. Dinner finished the way bad dinners always finish. Too much effort on the dessert, not enough honesty anywhere else. Fern helped clear the plates. Tyrone offered to take out the trash, and then took a very long time doing it. Edwin disappeared back toward the garage, and Mom moved around the kitchen with the energy of someone who believed she had said something difficult but necessary, and was now waiting to be respected for her courage. I sat on the back porch steps in the cold. Toby pushed through the screen door about 2 minutes later, I still don't know how he got it open, and sat down next to me, not in front of me. Next to me, shoulder to shoulder, or as close as a bull terrier can manage when the person next to him is significantly taller. I scratched the top of his head and looked out at the backyard. I had been sending money to this house for 11 months. Electric bill, my account. Internet, my account. Twice, when Dad texted that things were tight, I transferred money toward the mortgage without telling anyone except him. I paid the deposit for Fern's certification course. I covered the emergency plumber in August, when the pipe under the sink split and Mom called me crying at 7 in the morning. Not once did anyone call that contribution. They called it family. And tonight, Mom called me a burden, at the table, in front of everyone. I sat with that for a while. The cold helped, the quiet helped. Toby, leaning his full weight against my side, helped more than either. By the time I went back inside, I had made a decision, not an emotional one, a practical one. I found Mom in the kitchen wrapping up leftovers and stood in the doorway and said very calmly, I want you to know I heard exactly what you said tonight, and I want you to know I'm taking it seriously. She looked up. Good. Good, I said back. And I went to bed in my old room and stared at the ceiling and started making a list in my head of every automatic payment connected to my bank account in this house. It was a longer list than I expected. Down the hall, I could hear Toby's nails on the hardwood, then a soft thud as he settled outside my door. I didn't ask him to stay. He just bid. In the morning, everything was going to change. What I hadn't figured out yet was that Mom was about to walk into my room and hand me the exact words I needed to finally say out loud. She knocked twice and didn't wait for an answer. That was always her way. The knock was just a formality, a performance of politeness before she walked into whatever space she'd already decided was hers. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling on my second sock when she came in. She had her coffee mug. She was still in her robe. She leaned against the doorframe the way people do when they want to look casual, but they've actually been rehearsing the conversation since 5 in the morning. So, she said, are you going to be dramatic about last night, or are we moving on? I looked at her. Dramatic? She sighed like I was already exhausting her. Regina, I said what needed to be said. You're almost 30. You can't keep drifting through life expecting people to absorb you. Absorb me. That was the new word. Last night, I was a burden. This morning, I was something to be absorbed. I stood up and pulled my suitcase out from under the bed. That got her attention. What are you doing? I'm figuring something else out, I said. I'm figuring something else out. She straightened up from the doorframe. I told you the truth. That's different from telling you to leave. Is it? She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried a different angle, the one she always switches to when the first one doesn't land. Her voice dropped, got softer, got reasonable. You're being very sensitive. I'm your mother. I'm allowed to be honest with you. I folded a sweater and placed it in the suitcase, then another one. Dad appeared behind her in the hallway. He was holding a mug too. They looked like a team that had called a meeting and forgotten to agree on the agenda. He did his version of stepping in, which meant he said my name in a tone that was meant to sound calm, but was really just a request for me to stop making things uncomfortable. Regina, let's take a breath here. I'm breathing fine, Dad. Toby appeared from somewhere down the hall, slipped past both of them, and sat down next to my suitcase, just planted himself there. Fern came to the doorway a minute later, saw the suitcase, and went very still. Mom crossed her arms. "You're doing this for effect." "I'm doing this because you asked me to. I did not ask you to make a scene." I stopped packing, turned around and looked at her. Really looked. The way you look at something when you're done being afraid of it. "You called me a burden in front of my sister and husband at the dinner table on Thanksgiving, and this morning you walked in here to ask me if I was going to be dramatic about it." I let that sit for a second. "So I need you to understand something. I'm not packing because I'm upset. I'm packing because you were right. I don't belong in a house where that's how I get spoken to." She laughed, short and dry. "You don't belong. Regina, we have given you everything." And that was the one. That was the sentence that did it. I picked up my phone, opened my banking app, and I read it out loud. Every transaction. The electric bill, the internet, the 2 mortgage transfers, Fern's course deposit, the plumber in August, the groceries I'd covered in October when her card declined at the store and she called me from the parking lot, the kitchen, the silence. Fern said, very quietly, "You paid for my course?" Mom snapped. "That is not the point right now." But it was the point. It was the entire point. I zipped the suitcase, picked up my bag. Toby stood up the same second I did, like he'd been waiting, and walked with me to the door. I stopped in the living room. Dad was standing near the couch with his mug and his silence. Mom had followed me down the stairs, still talking, still finding new angles. And I turned around and said the 4 words I should have said 11 months ago. "Cover your own bills." Nobody moved. I let it land. Then I added, "Starting today." The look on Dad's face wasn't anger, it was math, the sudden, horrible arithmetic of someone realizing a system they never named out loud had just been switched off. Mom recovered faster. She always does. "You are not going to threaten this family because you have thin skin." I looked at her one last time. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm leaving exactly the way you asked." I opened the front door. Cold November air, gray sky, my car at the end of the driveway. Nobody followed me out. Nobody called my name. Toby made it 3 steps onto the porch before Mom called him back in. He looked at me, once, that wide, still face, and then went in. I got in the car, sat there for a second, hands on the wheel. My phone was already buzzing. I didn't look at it. Not yet. Sally picked up on the first ring. That's the thing about her. It doesn't matter what time it is or what she's doing. If I call, she picks up. I've never once gotten her voicemail when I actually needed her, and I don't think that's an accident. I think she just pays attention in a way most people don't bother to. I was parked outside a gas station 20 minutes from my parents' house, engine running, heater on low, the kind of gray November sky outside that makes everything look slightly unreal. Regina. Not a question, just my name, the way she says it when she already knows something happened. "Yeah," I said. "Where are you?" "My car." "Are you okay?" I thought about that for a second. My hands had stopped shaking somewhere around the 3rd traffic light, but my chest still felt like something heavy was resting on it. "I don't know yet. Maybe." "Tell me everything." So I did. Not the cleaned-up version. Not the version where everyone sounds complicated and human, and I'm careful to be fair to all sides. The real version. The fork set down, the word burden, the robe in the doorway this morning, the suitcase, the 4 words, the look on Dad's face when the math hit him. Sally didn't interrupt once. I could hear her breathing change about halfway through, that specific shift she makes when she's angry on my behalf, but knows she needs her to stay steady. When I finished, she said, "Come stay with me tonight." "Sally, I'm not asking. Come stay with me tonight and do not send them a single dollar out of guilt. Not one. Promise me." I leaned my head back against the seat. Outside, a man filled his tank and drove away, and the world continued operating completely indifferent to the fact that my family had just restructured itself in a living room in Allentown. "I promised," I said. I meant it. By the time I merged onto the highway, my phone had already collected 4 messages from Mom. I didn't read them. I could feel them there, the way you feel a bruise when you press near it, just not touching it directly, just aware it exists. I made it to Sally's apartment in Harrisburg by early afternoon. She met me at the door in a sweatshirt and socks, took the bag from my shoulder without asking, and said, "Couch is made up," like it had been ready for days. Maybe it had. Sally is the kind of person who prepares for things she hopes won't happen. We sat on our floor with takeout containers between us, and I finally let myself be tired. Not the performing kind of tired I'd been running on since last night, the real kind, the kind that sits in your back and your jaw and behind your eyes. She's going to call it a tantrum. In the family version of this story, I'm going to be the one who overreacted. Sally pointed her fork at me. "Let her. You have bank statements." She was right. I knew she was right, but knowing something and feeling the steadiness of it are 2 different things, and that night, I wasn't all the way there yet. I slept on Sally's pull-out couch under a blanket that smelled like laundry detergent and something faintly like cedar, and it was the most rested I'd felt in months. No sounds I was bracing for, no footsteps in the hallway that made me calculate someone's mood before they reached the door, just quiet. Real quiet, the kind that doesn't have anything hiding underneath it. In the morning, I had 11 messages. Mine's had escalated in a pattern I recognized. The first 2 were practical, something about a coat I left, something about an email from a utility company. The 3rd said I was childish. The 5th said I was punishing the family. The 8th said if I wanted to burn bridges, then fine, but I shouldn't expect them to be rebuilt. Dad called at 7 a.m., not to ask how I was, not to ask where I was staying, or whether I'd eaten, or whether I was okay. He called to ask whether the electric bill autopay was really set to my account and whether I had paused it. Paused. Like I'd put a subscription on hold, like I'd be back once I'd cooled off and we could resume normal programming. I didn't pause it, I canceled it. Silence. Then, "Regina, come on." "Come on," I repeated. "You're going to let the lights go out over this?" I sat up on the pull-out couch and looked at Sally's bookshelf across the room, all those spines lined up straight, and I thought about how many times I'd accepted that sentence, "come on," as if my feelings were the unreasonable thing in the room. "The lights were always going to go out, Dad. You just thought I'd be the one keeping them on forever." He didn't have an answer for that. He hung up about 30 seconds later. I put the phone face down on the cushion. Sally appeared from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of me, looked at my face, and said nothing, which was exactly right. I picked up my coffee and thought about Toby. I kept seeing him that morning, sitting next to my suitcase like he'd appointed himself witness to the whole thing, walking me to the door, standing on the porch those 3 steps before Mom called him back. He didn't follow me to the car. He couldn't. But I had this strange, irrational feeling that he understood what was happening better than most of the humans in that house. That afternoon, I found an apartment listing in a neighborhood 20 minutes from my office. Small, 3rd floor, 1 window above the kitchen sink that looked out over a parking lot and the edge of someone's oak tree. I called about it before I had even finished the coffee. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known sitting on Sally's pull-out couch in a borrowed blanket, was that the family group chat was about to light up, and what someone said in it was going to make me do something I couldn't take back. It started with my Aunt Linda. She texted me privately first, which I'll give her credit for. It was polite enough on the surface. "Regina, your parents are really struggling right now. I hope you're thinking about the bigger picture." The kind of message that sounds concerned but is actually just pressure wearing a cardigan. I didn't respond. Then she took it to the family group chat. I found out because Fern screenshotted it and sent it to me with no caption, which is Fern's way of saying, "I'm not getting involved, but I thought you should see this." Linda had written a paragraph. a full paragraph about family loyalty, about how the holidays were a difficult time, about how sometimes the people we love say things they don't mean, and the mature response is to extend grace. She didn't mention what Mom said to me. She didn't mention 11 months of bill payments. She mentioned twice that my parents were under a lot of strain and that disappearing without warning was not the answer. Disappearing. I had been called a burden on Thanksgiving, packed my bags the next morning, and canceled automatic payments that should never have been in my name. And the word making the rounds was disappearing. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years sent me a direct message. Heard you walked out on your family right before Christmas? That's really cold, Regina. I read that one 3 times. Sally was in the kitchen when I came out of the guest room holding my phone. She took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" Not a question, a statement. I showed her the messages. She read them, set the phone down on the counter, and said very quietly, "Okay, don't respond to any of them." "I'm not going to respond," I said. "I know that face. That's your responding face. It's my thinking face. On you, they're the same face." She was right. I was already composing sentences in my head, clean, factual, devastating sentences. But I put the phone down and went for a drive instead because I needed air and forward motion and something other than a screen to look at. I ended up at a small park near the edge of town, sat on a bench near the water. It was cold enough that my breath showed, and the ducks near the bank looked deeply unimpressed with the temperature and with me specifically. I called my grandfather. His name is Walter Slater. He's 74, he feeds birds in parks, he has strong opinions about baseball statistics, and he's the only person in my family who has never once made me feel like a problem to be managed. I knew he'd heard something by now. News moves fast in families, and it moves fastest when it's been edited. He picked up on the 3rd ring. There she is. "Hey, Grandpa. You sound like someone who's been staring at their phone too long." Accurate. "Where are you?" "A park, watching ducks." "Good. Ducks don't have opinions about your life choices." I laughed for the first time in 2 days. Actually laughed, the real kind that surprises you on the way out. I told him everything, same as I told Sally, but slower. He's older and he listens differently. Not like he's waiting to respond, but like he's actually filing things away. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother always wanted control more than she wanted closeness. I thought time might soften that. Sounds like it just gave her more practice." Something about hearing it from him, from someone who'd watched her for decades, made the whole thing feel less like my imagination and more like history, like a pattern that existed long before I walked into it. "Did I do the right thing, Grandpa?" He paused. "You did the honest thing. People confuse those two all the time." "What do I do about the group chat, about Linda and everyone else who thinks I abandoned them?" He was quiet for a moment again. Then, "Stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what happened. You know what actually happened. Document it, and then let the truth do what truth does when you stop hiding it." I sat with that. Document it. I drove back to Sally's apartment and sat at her kitchen table with my laptop and spent 2 hours going through my banking history. Screenshots of every transfer, every autopay, every receipt I forwarded to my own email when I paid for something in that house. The electric bill, the internet, the 2 mortgage shortfalls, Fern's course deposit, the plumber, the groceries in October. I organized it by date, made a folder, saved it in 2 places. I didn't send it anywhere yet, but I was ready. 2 days later, I've signed the lease on the apartment with the window above the sink and the oak tree in the parking lot. 3rd floor. Mine. I signed it on my lunch break and sat in my car afterward and felt something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Like the floor was solid under me, like I had built it myself and nobody could pull it out. That evening, Dad called from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up because I didn't know it was him until I heard his voice, thinner than usual, slightly careful, the voice he uses when he knows he's on uncertain ground. "The mortgage payment is short this month. Your mother thought maybe there was some confusion about what you'd stopped covering." Some confusion. I stood in Sally's kitchen holding a dish towel and almost admired the phrasing. 11 months of payments, and it had been quietly reclassified as a misunderstanding. "There's no confusion, Dad. Regina, I stopped paying for a house where I was called a burden. That's not confusion, that's consequence." He sighed, long and slow, the sigh of a man who has spent years hoping discomfort would resolve itself without his input. "Can we not do this again?" Not a question. "You mean, can we not be honest again?" He hung up. 20 minutes later, Mom called, and when I answered, what she said made me open my laptop, pull up that folder, and start writing a message to the group chat.
Mom didn't waste time. "If this house goes under because you decided to have a breakdown," she said, "that is something you are going to carry for a very long time." I was standing in Sally's kitchen. The overhead light was on. There was a half-eaten bowl of soup on the counter going cold. And I stood there, listening to my mother tell me that the financial collapse of a household I had been secretly funding was my moral failure. I let her finish. Then I said, "You called me a burden in front of the whole family. You told me to figure something else out. I did. That's the whole story." "You are twisting what I said." "I'm quoting what you said." She shifted. I could hear it, that slight change in register she makes when a direct approach isn't working and she needs a new angle. "After everything I have done for you, everything I sacrificed, and this is how you repay it?" There it was, the sacrifice speech. I had heard versions of it my entire life. The long, expensive inventory of everything she had given me, presented like a bill I could never fully settle. And for years it worked. For years I absorbed it and felt guilty and tried to pay it down with usefulness and compliance and money I transferred quietly on the second Friday of every month. Not tonight. I want to clear something up, since there seems to be confusion in this family about what happened. Over the past 11 months, I paid the electric bill, the internet bill, 2 mortgage shortfalls, Fern's certification course deposit, the emergency plumbing repair in August, the groceries twice in October, when her card declined and she called me from the parking lot. Silence. Not the thinking kind, the caught kind. "You were never asked to do all that," she said finally. "No," I said. "I was just made to feel like refusing would be cruel." She inhaled sharply. "That is a disgusting thing to say to your mother." "It's an accurate thing to say. You have no idea. I have 11 months of bank statements. I have screenshots. I have the email confirmation from the HVAC company. I have all of it. And I've been very quiet about it because I didn't want to embarrass anyone. But I need you to understand something." I stopped, let it get very still. "That's over." Another silence, longer this time. Then Mom said the thing she always says when she's losing an argument she started. "You've changed." And I almost let it go, almost moved past it the way I usually did, absorbing it, filing it away, keeping the peace. Instead, I said, "I know, that was the point." She hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, soup cold, light buzzing faintly overhead. Sally appeared in the doorway, read my face, and didn't say anything, just waited. "I'm going to send something to the family group chat," I said. "Okay. It's going to cause a problem. Regina," she leaned against the doorframe, "there's already a problem. You're just the only one willing to name it." I sat down at the kitchen table and I wrote it out. No insults, no drama, no paragraphs about how I felt or what I deserved or how unfair any of it was. Just facts. clean and simple and impossible to misread. I read it 3 times, didn't change a word, and sent it. I put the phone face down on the table and went to sit on the couch. Sally brought me tea I didn't ask for and sat in the chair across from me, and we just waited. 9 minutes. That's how long the silence lasted. Then the notifications started. Aunt Linda sent a private message that said simply, "I didn't know, I'm sorry." No paragraph this time, just that. The cousin who called me cold sent a voice note, and I could tell from the first 2 seconds he was embarrassed. He unsent the lecture he'd written in the group chat. I saw it disappear in real time. Fern called. She wasn't angry, she was crying. That specific kind of crying when someone finally sees the full picture of something they'd only been shown pieces of. Mom told me Dad picked up extra work to pay for my course. She told me that. I know, I said. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to feel bad about it. She went quiet for a moment, then, I feel bad about it. I know, that's okay. My grandfather texted 3 words, proud of you. Mom didn't respond to the group chat, not directly, but 40 minutes later, she called Aunt Linda, and I know this because Linda called me right after, and said, carefully, like she was choosing each word, "Your mother is very upset." "I imagine so," I said. "She feels humiliated. She humiliated me first, in person, in front of everyone. I just used a group chat." Linda didn't have an answer for that. We said goodbye, and I hung up and sat back on the couch and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not victory, not satisfaction, something quieter than that. Like a version of myself I'd been apologizing for my entire life had finally been allowed to just stand up straight. Outside Sally's window, the streetlights had come on. It was fully dark now, properly cold, the kind of December night that makes indoor lamplight look warm from the street. I thought about Toby, about him sitting next to my suitcase that morning, about his wide, certain face on the porch before Mom called him back inside. I pulled out my phone and texted Fern. "How's Toby doing?" She replied in under a minute. "He keeps sitting by the front door, like he's waiting for something." I read that twice, set my phone down, looked at the ceiling. I had a new apartment, I had my documents, I had people in my corner, I had finally told the truth in a room, even if the room was a group chat where lies had been living rent-free for years. But there was still one conversation I hadn't had, one that couldn't happen over text, couldn't happen on the phone, couldn't happen with Sally sitting across from me as backup. It had to happen in person, and I was going to have to be the one to start it.
I gave it 2 weeks. Not because I needed to cool down. I was already cool. I gave it 2 weeks because I wanted to be standing in my own apartment when it happened. I wanted to have a lease with my name on it, a key on my keyring, a coffee maker on my counter before I walked back into that house one final time. I wanted to know, in my body, not just my head, that I had somewhere to return to that belonged entirely to me. The apartment was small, 3rd floor. The radiator knocked every morning like it was announcing itself. The window above the kitchen sink looked out at a parking lot and the top half of an oak tree that had probably been there longer than the building. I bought 2 plates, 1 skillet, a secondhand coffee maker, and a blue bath towel that matched nothing. It was the most at home I had felt in years. Sally helped me move on a Saturday. We made 4 trips in her car, ordered pizza at 7, sat on the floor because I didn't have a couch yet, and talked about everything except my family. It was deliberate. It was good. It felt like the first evening in a long time that was just mine, not shaped around someone else's mood, not spent calculating whether the air in the room had shifted. That night, alone for the first time, I stood at the kitchen window with a cup of tea and looked out at the parking lot and the oak tree and the dark sky above the roofline, and I felt something settle in me that I didn't have a word for. Not happiness, exactly. something more like alignment, like the outside of my life was finally starting to match something true on the inside. I called Fern the next morning. We'd been texting more since the group chat, carefully at first, then less carefully, then just honestly, the way sisters are supposed to talk when nobody is managing the conversation for them. She had questions. I answered them. She had feelings about the answers. I let her have them without trying to fix or minimize any of it. "Are you going to talk to Mom?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "when I'm ready." "Are you ready?" "Getting there." "Toby still sits by the front door every evening, just so you know." I smiled at the oak tree. "Tell him I said hi." I drove to Allentown on a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks and 3 days after Thanksgiving. Gray sky, dry roads, the kind of winter light that makes everything look like an old photograph. I didn't call ahead. I'd learned a long time ago that calling ahead with my mother just gave her time to build a set and arrange the furniture of her emotions before I arrived. I knocked. Dad opened the door. He looked at me the way he'd been looking at me my whole life when things had gotten difficult, relieved I was there and guilty about the relief, like my showing up solved a problem he hadn't wanted to admit existed. "Regina," he said. "Hey, Dad." He stepped back. I came in. The house felt different. Smaller, maybe, or maybe I was just different inside it. The familiar smell, coffee, that specific dish soap Mom had used for 20 years, the faint wood smell from the hallway closet, all of it still there, all of it now at a slight distance, like a song you know well but are hearing from another room. Toby came around the corner before I'd taken my coat off. He didn't barrel into me this time. He walked up slowly, deliberately, like he understood this was a different kind of visit. He pressed his wide head into my hand and stood there. I crouched down and held his face in both hands, and I looked at him with those calm, dark eyes, and I thought, "You have been the most consistently honest creature in this entire situation." I scratched his ears. He exhaled. We stayed like that for a moment. Then I stood up and went to find Mom. She was in the kitchen. Of course she was. The kitchen was always her room, her stage, her territory, the place where she felt most in control of any scene. She was at the counter with her back to me when I came in. She heard me. She didn't turn around immediately. That was deliberate too. "Regina," she said finally, still facing the counter. "Mom." She turned. Her face was composed. That was the word for it. Composed. The way a person looks when they have decided in advance not to show you anything they don't intend to show you. We looked at each other across the kitchen. I'd rehearsed versions of this conversation for 2 weeks. Long versions, short versions, versions where I said everything, and versions where I said almost nothing. I'd written paragraphs in my notes app at midnight and deleted them in the morning. I'd asked Sally what she thought and nodded, then decided to say something different anyway. In the end, I said the simplest version. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to relitigate Thanksgiving. I'm here because you're my mother, and I'd like to figure out if there's a version of this where we can be honest with each other going forward. Not perform honesty, actually be it." She was quiet for a moment. "You embarrassed this family. I embarrassed you first." The group chat was a response to a month of people being told a version of events that left the most important parts. I kept my voice level. "I didn't make anything up, Mom. I didn't exaggerate. I just told the truth with the same audience you'd already been working with." Her jaw tightened. I'm not finished." I said it gently, but I said it. I spent 11 months contributing to this household financially, not because anyone asked me directly, because the situation was arranged so that refusing felt cruel. And then I sat at your table on Thanksgiving and got told I was a burden. I stopped. Let that land. I need you to understand that I'm not angry about that anymore, but I am changed by it.
And the version of me that absorbed things quietly and kept paying and kept showing up and kept hoping it would eventually be enough, that version is gone. She's not coming back. Mom looked at me for a long time. Something moved across her face. Not an apology exactly. Not yet. Maybe the beginning of the understanding that an apology would eventually need to exist. A crack in the composure. Small, but real. "You're very different," she said quietly. "I know. I don't know if I like it. That's okay. I do." Dad had appeared in the doorway at some point during all of this. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, and for once he didn't look like he was waiting to disappear. He looked like a man who was tired of the cost of his own silence. "I should have said something," he said. "At the table, I should have said something." It wasn't much, but it was the most honest thing I'd heard him say in years. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." We stood there, the three of us, in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and dish soap and 20 years of a family trying and failing and occasionally succeeding at being something real to each other. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't a movie ending where everyone cries and hugs and the music swells. It was just three people in a room, finally in the same version of events at the same time. Toby wandered in and sat on my foot. I looked at him, that wide, ridiculous, loyal face. That dog had been the most present witness to everything. The dinner, the packing, the porch, the departure. He hadn't been able to follow me to the car, but he'd waited by the door for 2 weeks anyway. I reached down and scratched behind his ear. He groaned, leaned in, stayed. On the drive home that evening, I passed through the neighborhood where I'd grown up, past the pharmacy where I used to buy candy after school, past the park where my grandfather fed birds and handed me the truest sentence anyone had given me through all of this. Build a life they can't rewrite. So that's what I did. I got promoted in the spring, bought a real couch, started sleeping without dread, started answering my phone without bracing first. Fern and I talked every week, actually talked, not the careful, edited version of talking we'd done all our lives. My grandfather came to see the apartment in March and sat at my small kitchen table and drank bad coffee and said it suited me, which was the highest compliment he knew how to give. Mom and I were not fixed. I want to be honest about that. We were not suddenly close or easy or uncomplicated, but we were real with each other in a way we hadn't been before. And real, I had learned, was worth more than comfortable. One evening in April, I was labeling leftovers in my refrigerator after a 12-hour shift, standing in my kitchen in socks, the radiator knocking its usual greeting, the oak tree visible in the last of the evening light through the window above the sink. And I realized I'd gone the entire day without hearing my mother's voice in my head. Not because she was gone, not because I had won something or proven something or finished something, but because I had finally built a life loud enough to fill the space. 4 words started it. Cover your own bills. Petty, maybe. Sharp, definitely. But sometimes the most honest thing you can do is stop funding a version of yourself that was never really you to begin with. And if you've ever been called a burden by the people you needed most, hear me clearly. Walking away is not the cruel thing. Staying silent was.